Hello, and welcome to the Microsoft Virtual Academy on the Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. My name is Mark Simos. I work in Microsoft's Enterprise Cybersecurity Group.
My name is Sachin Gupta. I also work in Enterprise Cybersecurity Group.
And so we're going to be talking to you today about Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture, which is really a comprehensive diagram of the Microsoft cybersecurity and security capabilities, and then how do you use it to build a identity-based security perimeter. We'll have 5 modules today, the first of which is this overview where we'll go over the whole topic. Then we'll be talking about the how to build an identity security perimeter, really taking those building blocks and how do you build each one of those and which ones to focus on. The third module will be on threat detection, where we talk about threats and then how do you address that from a strategic perspective and what are the components of the reference architecture that add to that and bring it to life essentially. And then we'll talk about server and Azure security, really foundational components. And then the last piece we'll summarize it up and close it out. So with that, let's go ahead and get going. So this is the first module, the overview. And as you take a look at the reference architecture, you might notice that it's a bit complicated. This is something that, as Microsoft built a lot of lessons learned up as we defend our own environment, our own IT environment. We defend the cloud services, such as Azure and Office 365, those hyperscale modern cloud services. And as we help our customers, because we have a consulting arm that works with customers to investigate incidents, recover from them, and implement mitigations, we brought all these lessons learned together into one reference architecture that really is meant to help organizations understand what Microsoft has, as well as more specifically the strategies and the capabilities we believe customers need to have to be successful in this age of modern threats. So Sachin, did you want to talk a little bit about the capability view of the reference architecture?
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it. And the goal here is to help our customers understand what this reference architecture looks like from a capability perspective, right? So if you think from an identity and access perspective, it's all about how do I make sure that I'm enforcing, multi-factor authentication, strong authentication when my users are authenticating to either on-premises application or applications in the cloud. It's also about how do I get visibility, the right set of reporting coming out of that enforcement of those policies to make sure I understand what is going on with my identities, again, both on-premises and in the cloud. If you look at the information protection capability aspect, it's more about what is it that I need to make sure my data is protected regardless of where it is. So this is really a high-level view into the set of capabilities that you need to make sure your assets are protected. When I'm talking about assets, I'm saying identity, your data, your applications, your infrastructure, your devices. And we need to make sure that you're not thinking about security in silos, but rather you're taking a comprehensive look. And this gives you a capability-driven approach to comprehensive security in your environment.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into and talk a little bit about the traditional security program, if you will, right? So if you think about it, most of the customers have implemented their security program taking these 4 different categories in mind. Mm-hmm. The first one is, of course, how do you go about protecting your network perimeter? So think about solutions like next-gen firewall, IPS, IDS, and so on and so forth, right? So that's there.
Your classic edge strategy where you're protecting at that network perimeter, yep.
Absolutely. The second category would be protecting your identity. That's really the foundation of building the security model, if you will, right? So
Absolutely.
Our customers have implemented, Active Directory. They may have extended that Active Directory into the cloud as they go and, enable their users to talk to and leverage SaaS applications, or whether it's Office 365 or other third-party applications in the cloud.
And they might have multi-factor. There's a lot of things that organizations have done to invest in that area.
Absolutely. And then if you think about information protection, at the very least, most of the customers have implemented some sort of DLP solution to do discovery and classification on their data.
Yeah, it could be some of the basic features we have in Office 365, or it could be a very sophisticated, third-party solution that's integrated throughout their enterprise.
Absolutely. And then the fourth piece up there is more from a visibility and security monitoring perspective. So think about SOC. right? So whether it's using a centralized SIEM solution so I can get all of my logs centralized in one place so I can do correlation and threat detection. At the same time, you have to take a proactive approach as well. So
Yep.
you have these threat hunting teams that most of the customers have invested in to figure out proactively what is going on in my environment. What does that baseline look like from a security posture perspective, right? So those are the different components that we can think of as critical aspect of any typical security program today. Would
Yep.
that be fair?
And that's exactly what we encounter when we work with customers and we talk with them. What's your strategy? What are you doing right now to help protect against cyber threats? This is what we typically start with. So we wanted to kind of set a baseline to make sure everybody understood where we're starting from. And now let's take a look and see what the end state is. Where are we going on this journey as we become a secure modern enterprise?
Yep.
And when we look at what that actually looks like, it's really two parts at the highest level. First, it has to be aligned to the business because IT security and IT for that matter are really support functions. They're really there to enable the business to be successful, or in the case of a nonprofit or government agency, really enable the mission to be successful. And at the same time, you have to be cognizant and aware and aligned to the modern threat environment, which is constantly evolving. And so these two are the hallmarks of what we call a secure modern enterprise. And we can break that down further when we look at the identity and the apps and the data and the infrastructure and the devices perspective. Identity really is a security perimeter. We're going to talk a lot about that. The business data is really captured, or the business value rather, is captured in the apps and data. What are the applications and capabilities they're providing to their customers and their employees? And what is the data that stores all of this knowledge and information about their business that helps them run it every day? And the infrastructure piece, it's a very important foundational component. A lot of benefits by embracing the cloud there for the threat detection, for hygiene, for making sure all those things are right. And so when you look at the devices piece, there's really three hallmarks of a good device strategy for your corporate devices. You need a great user experience so the users use it and don't go to their own one for the things you don't want them to. You've got to have those really strong defenses that protect you against threats, really hardware backed, really strong security. But you got to recognize and assume breach and assume failure that those things will, users will make mistakes, things will happen, and so you need to be able to investigate and respond and detect threats on there, so you can keep that front line defended. So as we talk to customers, there's really two different initiatives that we really talk to them about, or two different kinds of initiatives. The first is what our incident response teams do week in and week out. They're investigating incidents. They are dealing with major incidents. Things that, we obviously don't name names, but there's a lot of customer large-scale breaches that have been in the news, and our teams are involved in many of those and many more that are not actually disclosed on the news. There's a lot of activity in that space, and the bad news is that adversaries are very successful at those attacks, and they're very consistent with it. But the good news is that we understand them very well. We've seen them for 5 years and up, the similar techniques being used. And so we've developed some very prescriptive guidance to help customers there. And it's something that we published all the stuff that's important, that, hey, this is how you protect yourself against these threats. Open sourced a lot of things that our consulting teams had developed as they worked with these customers to help customers protect against these, because they're well-known attacks, pass the hash, credential theft. There's a consistent set of things.
So Mark, this is really the foundation for building that security model.
Absolutely, because this really undermines all of your other security. So this is just, you have to check this box before you can move on to all the other things that you need to do. This is just a very foundational component. And so the other thing that we do is once you have that under control and you're safe from those types of attacks that we see all the time, this is where it gets interesting, because it really depends on the organization itself and what are the inherent business value that needs to be protected. What are the inherent threats that these organizations face, and what investments have they made? Where are they pretty good on threat detection, but they haven't really spent time on information protection? There's a lot of variables that would say, okay, which one of these initiatives should I drive to? And our intent here is really to kind of show you how you would approach each of those initiatives, whichever one happens to be top priority for your organization at the time.
So basically what you're saying is, security is always a journey for us and for our customers.
Absolutely.
And this really provides our customers with a roadmap as to how to enhance your security posture.
Exactly, so that people have clarity on what should I be investing in first. What's the best bang for my buck? How do I get the most return on my investment into security? How do I get the most amount of protection assurances for what I do? So when we take a look at the major incident pieces, and this is going to populate out here, this just gives you an idea of these same components. And we've referenced the privilege access roadmap in the previous slide, so we encourage customers to go to that. It'll be one of the links in the course. But these are where those components show up on the roadmap. And we have the protection pieces, we have detection pieces, and the response pieces in case there is an incident that is successful. How do we handle those in the context of where all those show up is on there.
Mark, let's get into sort of this concept of security perimeter, right? So if we think about it in the historical or traditional context, we know that most of the customers, again, we talked about it, have some sort of network perimeter.
And even before that, before we get into even a network perimeter, the network perimeter was a reflection of a traditional military strategy. I jokingly say it's the pointy sticks at the edge of the village or at the edge of the fort. The idea of a security perimeter that's a consistent barrier between threats and the things you're protecting, that's a universal concept. That's been in security since
for a long time.
Since security was security. I mean,
yeah.
it's long before we even envisioned that there could possibly be a calculator or a computer. And that principle is there. And
that traditional network perimeter has worked very well for a long time, right? It has been able to repel those, traditional threats, if you will, and kept those threats outside of the four walls of organization. Has worked great, right?
Yeah, when we connected up the computers with networking, we were like, wait a something, we need some sort of firewall or barrier here, and that's what we built.
Exactly. However, we also know that the attackers are getting very, very sophisticated. The threats are getting sophisticated as well. And they're finding reliable ways to get into your organization, right? So whether it's phishing attack, whether it's social engineering, malware, or other form of credential theft, they are finding ways to get into your organization. And then, more importantly, they're staying in your organization undetected for a long period of time.
Yep.
And that's a big challenge for organizations as they think about modern cybersecurity. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a matter that while the attackers don't succeed with every single email that they send, they are reliably able to get in. That's the challenge, is they're able to do that, they're able to persist, they're able to get in, and then they're able to get around reliably. They may have a few failures along the way, but that's really diminished that network perimeter. Now, of course, if you don't put up a firewall, you're going to get all the old attacks coming back, and they have no problem going back to the old ways.
So you still need that network perimeter, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, you got to think about your data is also moving out of your organization. So whether it's third-party SaaS application or whether it's unmanaged device, BYOD is a big initiative for most of the customers out there. How do you make sure that the data is protected regardless of where it is, right? So that in itself is a big challenge.
Yeah, there's no firewall between your data and the attackers now. You just simply don't have one. There's no line you can draw in a network topography diagram that says this is where we're going to protect it. It's just not there.
Yep. And so if you think about sort of this new firewall, if you will, right? So we believe that new firewall should be really based on identity, right? And that identity perimeter should cross all these different assets, so whether it's device, whether it's data, your application, and everything around it, right? That's the only way that we can have a comprehensive sort of protection to protect your assets.
Yeah, because the only thing that separates, your data that's out there on a device, whether it's managed or unmanaged, or on a cloud service, whether it was sanctioned and IT approved and managed, or whether it was unsanctioned, they're just using something that gets their job done. The only thing that we have as a control is the authentication. That, hey, I got to log in to get to that, whether I'm logging in with my corporate identity or not.
And it better be some sort of strong authentication.
Exactly. And who has permission to it? What's your authorization hygiene? Who has access to it? Is it following the rules? Is it following policy? Those are the controls you have. And so that's the line that you can draw, and you have to build your front line, your perimeter, your security perimeter based on that. And that's just the new world of cloud. As we embrace all these wonderful devices that give us so much productivity, we have to have a way to secure it, and that's the front line. It's identity.
And then again, just going a little bit deeper into this identity perimeter, right? So in the traditional sense, we used to look at identity as just some user ID, if you will, right? And today, I believe what we are saying is that identity is not just about who that user is in terms of user ID. Identity is also application, right? It's also
Yes.
data. It's also your device, because everything that is able to access your application, right, is an identity to you.
Exactly, and all of those should be involved in that decision of, is this the person that they claim to be? And should this person have access to this data application, whatever business valuable item is? All of those elements, not only do they each have their own identities, but each of them, you need to have all of that context when you make a decision. Is this really that person? Because they're logging in where they're supposed to be with a device that I know and that's trusted, and they've got the right password and they were able to do a multi-factor. All of these things contribute to having a really good authentication mechanism and an authorization mechanism. And so as we look to build an identity perimeter in the next module, and we'll talk to you about how we do that, we're going to be going through each of these different elements to explain it.
Absolutely, and then going a little bit deeper into the risk associated with that identity perimeter. So we talked about applications. We talked about how the SaaS is getting adopted at an increasingly high rate, if you will, right?
Yes.
And that in itself is challenging for the organizations. One of the challenges could be shadow IT. How do you make sure that the users are only dealing with sanctioned apps in your organization, right? And it's not so much about that the user don't want to just go and work with a sanctioned app, but the users want to be productive. And a lot of times they run into whether it's barriers within IT or other scenarios, and they just end up using SaaS applications that provide for easy access, right? And as a security practitioner, I would want to know each and everything that is going on in my organization, right?
Yeah.
Getting visibility into what the users are doing with third-party SaaS application, which data is flowing in and out, is of primary value to me.
Exactly, because if you're the CISO and you're accountable for this, or you're responsible for this, and the users chose to do this and the corporate data left the environment, I'm still going to get fired if that was a big enough deal to get me fired. And so I really need to understand that and have that visibility and control, and as much influence as I can over those users to get them into the policy and the guidelines that I know can keep that data safe and those users safe.
Absolutely, and the same goes with this notion of unmanaged devices, right? Again, ties very, very closely with the data.
Yeah, and that's how the data leaves the enterprise's control, is through those devices, through those applications. And then, of course, the final challenge is the data itself. So when the data leaves the organization's visibility and control, it's essentially unprotected, and it can be used in any way, whether that's positive for the organization as the user means to and is intended to in most cases, or it can be used in a negative way and sent out to WikiLeaks or what have you. And so having that data not be protected, not phoning home, not encrypted while it's outside of the organization's control, not on our device, not on our apps, etc. That's the other part of it that you have to address when you build an identity perimeter, is making sure that data itself, it's really hard for it to leave the organization's visibility even when it leaves the devices.
I completely agree, and I think in the next set of modules, we are going, as we talk about this identity security perimeter, we're also going to talk about the capabilities that organizations need to be able to protect their assets, right? And
Absolutely.
then how would that provide the right sort of visibility? How would that provide the right sort of protection, if you will, right, against these modern threats out there?
Exactly. So we will see you all in Module 2, where we build the identity perimeter. Thank you.
Thank you.